Well, what we've learned today, starting with Ben, is that we have got a very need-rich environment that we have learned about today. Isn't that true? When I was growing up, I loved to read children's books and children's stories that were kind of my safe place. And certainly, I remember Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I mean, who has not heard this story? But when I'm reading the story as a kid, I'm thinking, man, this girl is so picky about where she sits and what she eats and how she takes a nap in someone else's house. And I looked at that story and I thought it was really interesting because I thought I could never be like Goldilocks. I'm just not wired up like that. And I'm not used to that. And then I realized, well, some of that is because of the children that we serve. These are children that are not picky at all about where they sit or what they eat or where they lie down. In fact, if they're given a bite to eat and they're given a place or a bed in a safe, loving home, they're very happy about that. And these are children, as you've already heard, that have come from the most difficult places. Children have been thrown up against walls and locked in closets and have been beaten with vacuum cleaner cords and 2x4s. These are children that hide under their beds because their nightmares are real. So these children, the children that we are used to ministering to, are not picky whatsoever about sitting or about the food or the bed. But the adults that serve the children we're talking about, now that's a different story. We as adults are pretty picky. And so, when I'm thinking about how do we talk to exhorting the church about getting involved with the plight of today's orphan, it really is about finding that just right fit for adults. Because it's adults that are going to be needing to minister to the children. And I like to look at it like this. It's like, there's like thousands of people sitting on the pews across America, and we already know the needs of the children. It's like, what if we could just activate those folks to find out what God has got for them, what God has called them to? I've got some suggestions here, some thoughts here. I suggest you look for three things. If you're out there and you're looking for some things to get involved in this ministry, look for these three things to find the just right area for you. Just say engage, empower, and envelop. I've heard engage all day long today, and empower, great words. But I'm talking about engage is that you find a ministry where you can actually meet the children. The children have changed our lives almost more than we have had any influence or change into their lives. They changed my life for sure. So engage. Empower. And that is once you find the right place, once you find that fit for you, I would suggest that you get as much training as you can and you learn about the children. In fact, I suggest you learn from the children themselves. And the last one, envelop. And that is, look, we've already heard it said many, many times, but I'd like to say this: connect with passion-matched people. And that is, find those people in your church who form this community of sustainable support. Because that becomes very important for us as adults to stay in this for the long haul. Well, let's see how this plays out. I want to tell you a story about Kathy and a little girl named Stacy. Stacy's mom had prostituted herself ever since Stacy was a little girl, in a little one-bedroom apartment downtown in the city they lived. And there was she was turning tricks in the other room, and there was a constant stream of uncles that were coming through. And what Stacy would do is, to kind of entertain herself, she would put on these horror slasher flick movies. And she would play violent video games. And it breaks my heart to think of the sounds that are coming from the room right next to Stacy. And because of the things that her mom was involved in, she ended up going into what I call the revolving door of opportunity with foster care. And that is, she was in foster care, she was back with mom when mom was on track, and in and out. But what that did is that afforded Stacy to be able to go to a camp that was designed specifically for her, a camp for foster kids. And when she went to camp, she was able to go from 8 years old all the way to 12 years old. 5 years. It was amazing. And what happened when she turned 13, something really strange took place, and that is, Stacy's mom called up the camp director and said, "Look, I'm going to jail for a few years. can you take Stacy? And she said, you guys were the only ones that I know that love her, and she trusts you. Could you please take my daughter? Well, that created a dilemma. So the camp director got together with their leadership team, and they began to talk about what they would do and how they could be able to help. And one couple stood out and said, look, we will take Stacy into our home. And I talked to that mom, Kathy, and I began to ask her, I said, Kathy, wait a second. Why would you do that? And she said, really? I've been doing this ministry, this camp ministry, for 7 years. We knew exactly what we were getting into when we took Stacy into our home. And I said, okay, all right. And she said, of all the things that foster kids know about adults, and one thing they know is that eventually you will leave them. And she said, we made a promise to Stacy when she came into our home that we are not going to leave her. We're going to stick with her no matter what. And she said, now, Stacy's now 14 years old, and it's been the most difficult thing that her and her husband have ever been through. All the vile, evil things that this little girl has experienced in her life now starts kind of fleshing out as they're teenagers. And I said, well, how did you guys deal with that? Well, she said, the church came around us as support, and they began to help us out. And when we need respite care, they were there. And whatever we needed, the entire team did things with them to make this possible for this one little girl. And I just thought that was an amazing story because that's what it's all about. So what do we learn from the story of Goldilocks? Well, one is we learned that Goldilocks was obviously, she needed to find a bed or a chair or a piece of food, or whatever, to suit her. And that's completely understandable from the story. But you know what else we find out? Is that Papa Bear had the big chair, he had the big bowl, and he had the hard bed. But it was interesting, it was just right for him. And so it was for Mama Bear and for Junior Bear. And that is, some folks in the church, you will find your ministry, it'll be easy, and you'll fit right in, and things will go well. But for others, they need a little trial and error. They need a safe place to kind of experiment and get involved and see what it's like to be involved with these kids. So all this, I want to leave you with this. Not everyone can be a foster parent, but anyone can help a foster child.